Welcome to our real story. The economy seems to be unbelievably complex if you listen to the experts. I like to think about it, like I think about my own finances. I've got an income, I make money. You've got an income, you've got expenses. At the end of the year, you've either saved money or you've piled up, debt on credit cards and home equity lines, right? Every year that you don't pay that money back, the interest payments get higher and higher, forcing you to either cut your spending or borrow even more money, which is basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. Eventually, when there's no more money left for you to borrow and banks say, okay, you're not really a good risk, you have to declare bankruptcy. Well, that is exactly the position our country is now entering in. Despite all of the lip service about cutting back, the U.S. Treasury Department announced just last week that the 2008 deficit, now in the hands of Democrats, has doubled the same period last year. The reason for it is simple. While our revenue is up 3.2%, our spending is up 8.3%. If we were a business, we'd be bankrupt by now. Issues like the credit crisis, the housing market collapse, the rising oil prices, they get all of the blame. But the real story is, our core problem, the one nobody wants to talk about, is simple: spending and debt. Americans have spent far too much money. Banks have lent too much money. Everybody is greedy. The government has printed too much money. And now, both in our homes and in Washington, we're starting to see the consequences. Yet, instead of letting this forest burn, instead of letting it all play out, instead of letting the markets correct themselves so everybody learns a lesson to not be greedy, our government is once again riding in on a white horse to save the day. They're slashing interest rates. They're pumping out billions in rebate checks. They're freezing mortgage rates. Some politicians even want our government now to guarantee these bad loans made either to stupid people or made by greedy private lenders. And somehow or another, we're all supposed to learn a lesson from that. I know what lesson we should be learning: stop buying things we can't afford. How and when will this ever get through the pinheads in Washington? How is that ever going to be learned if no one is ever allowed to fail? A few weeks ago, I introduced you to a guy who I think may be the last honest guy in Washington. He's the Comptroller General of the United States. He heads the Government Accountability Office, which there is none in Washington, which makes him our nation's chief bean counter. He's a presidential appointee. He answers to no one except you. Last Friday, our Comptroller General, David Walker, announced that he will resign next month. He joins me now to talk about some of the things he wants Americans to know about the future of their country before he leaves. And David, I can't wait to talk to you when you're out of office. I want to invite you at the front to come back at that time. I've been trying to figure out one thing, and maybe you can help me with this. How is it we are going to be in better shape if the government comes in? Schumer and Chris Dodd are already talking about resurrecting, programs that were part of the New Deal era to take on all of these bad loans from the banks. How does this put us in a better position?
It doesn't necessarily put us in a better position. I mean, we've become addicted to debt in good times and bad. We ran a $163 billion deficit last year. We're going to run a $410 billion deficit this year. And that's before baby boomers retire in big numbers. We're out of control.
But David, we're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars of loan. We're talking about allowing the government to basically become a bank. Basically what happened this weekend over in London, where they just nationalized a bank. We're on the verge of doing that stuff, are we not?
Well, we have to get serious and recognize that while nobody wants a recession, recessions happen. That's part of the business cycle. But the real problem that we have is spending is out of control. We're going to see record deficits and debt levels if we don't end up starting to reform our entitlement programs and our tax system. And the first thing we have to do is learn the rule of holes. Stop digging and reimpose some tough budget controls.
Okay, tell me, because you're smarter than most people, David, on this kind of stuff. I think it was the World Bank came out and said foreign governments need to start digging a hole themselves. They need to start debt spending. Some guy from AIG over in London last week said the United States government, in order to avoid a depression, needs to start buying assets and start buying stocks and save the stock market, etc., etc. I look at this stuff, and again, I put it in the view of my own home. And I say, I couldn't run it like this. This would make me bankrupt. Are these people stupid? Is it intentional? Are they intentionally trying to drive this down? Or are they somehow or another so naive to think that debt spending actually somehow or another turns a profit eventually?
Well, people are just, frankly, very short-term focused. The United States government and too many American families spending more money than it makes, charging the national credit card, building up debt, and expecting our kids and grandkids to pay it off. I mean, you can do that for a short period of time. You can't do it forever.
Okay. Now, here's what really concerns me, and I want to show a couple of graphics here. The big things are not what we're spending. You know, everybody talks about earmarks. That's pennies in comparison to what we're facing. Let me show you the first one. $53 trillion to cover programs like Social Security and Medicare. That is $455,000 needed per every single household to pay that debt off. But let me, David, I want to take these one by one, and you kind of explain what we're facing here. You say by 2027, you've done the math, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and net interest consume all revenues. Deficit hits 10% of GDP. Debt held by the public exceeds 100% of GDP. What does that mean, 2027? What does that mean?
Well, what that means is that all of the things that the Founding Fathers intended for the federal government to do are going to be crowded out by entitlement programs unless we end up reforming those programs, unless we end up re-examining the base of spending, and also look at our tax system. I mean, we're just on an imprudent and unsustainable path. And the problem, Glenn, is not just the deficits in debt, it's that we have a savings deficit. We're having to borrow all this money from foreigners. So foreign players hold more of our national mortgage. That's a high-risk strategy.
Okay, let me go to this, because this I saw the Secretary of Treasury up testifying. I saw the Fed chair testify on this stimulus package. I didn't see you testify. Did anybody ask you to testify on this and see if the stimulus package was a good idea, that it'll do anything? Do you believe in the stimulus package?
Well, I've been asked about it. I wasn't asked to testify. I was, however, the sole witness before the Senate Budget Committee on, I think it was January 29th, to talk about our real problem. And our real problem is not short-term economic uncertainty and weakness. Our real problem are these structural deficits and the debt levels that will come with them.
But doesn't this, because like you just said, we don't have this money to give. We say we're just going to give you a refund. We don't have this money to give a refund. We're spending in debt. So don't we have to go to places like China, borrow that money, pay interest on that money? It's another log on the top of the fire long term, is it not, David?
Well, there's no question that will increase the deficit. And about 75% of our new debt within the last several years has been purchased by foreign players, and we're lucky they're willing to do it in the short term, but over the long term, they may not be willing to do it. And if they change their mind, then interest rates will go up, and if interest rates go up, then you start seeing a ripple effect, not just on the budget, but on the economy and on American families.
How likely is that to happen anytime soon?
Over time, I think it will happen if we don't mend our ways. I really believe, Glenn, we've got 5 to 10 years to get our act together and show our foreign lenders that we're going to get serious. And that's one of the reasons I'm going to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, to try to get more active and more specific to help save America's future.
Show me the slide of 2053, please. You say, by 2053, you say the model blows up.
Well, the model that we've used at GAO since 1992 to do long-range simulations, we had fiscal sustainability for 40-plus years in 2001. Now that same model, based upon reasonable assumptions, crashes in 2053. Now, we're not going to allow that to happen, Glenn. You and I both know that. This country will never allow itself to go bankrupt. But we've got to start getting serious. We've got a large and growing problem that elected officials are not taking seriously enough, and that's got to change.
David, here's the thing, and I know you can't speak out politically, so I'm not going to ask you. Answer this any way you can. We got a guy, John McCain, who says no new taxes, and he wants to cut earmarks. But earmarks is a drop in the bucket. Earmarks is not the answer. Then you've got Obama and Hillary, the other two remaining candidates. They're proposing to spend an additional, I think Obama's was $197 billion every single year. There are New Deal programs that are right around the corner. What does that mean for us?
Well, people have to learn how math works. I mean, the numbers don't come close to working. In the case of John McCain, he says no new taxes. Well, one has to keep in mind that even if you don't change the tax laws, The amount of revenues that we're going to have are going to go up over time because we haven't fixed the alternative minimum tax, because with any inflation and any economic growth, over time you'll generate more revenue. So what does he mean by that? But I'll tell you this. You can't be promising a bunch of new entitlement programs and a bunch of new spending and not pay for it. We're in a $53 trillion hole that goes up $2 to $3 trillion a year by doing nothing.
All right, David, we want to have you back when you're not part of the government again and have a real frank conversation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate. You are a true public servant, sir, being honest when times are tough. Thank you so much for being on the program.